This is the first in the series that we're looking to put together to bridge the gap between corporate and small suppliers, and really looking to find ways to build bridges, to develop resilient strategies, and try to solve some of the significant challenges that we currently have in this very much affected corona world. So just to put a little bit of a context on it, in South Africa, they're predicting at least 75% of small suppliers, small businesses under threat or under challenge as a result of COVID. And we have a lot of corporates as well, really feeling the pressure under this very unusual global event. And so I'd like to I've got some very interesting, very exciting guests here with me today to try and look and to resolve some of the possible solutions that could be put into these supply chains, particularly looking at digital. So what I'd like to do is maybe ask my first invited guest, Ben Ngobi. So Ben is a global procurement sustainability lead for Accenture. And he leads not only their global procurement strategy, but also Northern Europe supplier inclusion and diversity programs. And Ben is responsible for the strategy to embed environmental, social, and governmental factors into purchasing decisions. So incredibly well positioned, and I'm really honored to have you on the line with us today, Ben. Won't you please give us a little bit of a context as to what's happening in the global environment? I know you're calling us from London, so maybe just give us a little bit of a context of what's happening globally as a result of COVID.
Yes, good morning, and thank you very much for asking me to present on this call. And I think we are living in unprecedented times, and what has happened over the last 4 weeks or even 3 months has transformed what we thought was normal. And I think what's highlighted is how interconnected, how dependent we are on suppliers none of us have even ever known. And I think for me, until recently, I didn't know who made particular masks, right, and where they were made. So I think going forward, what we're going to be seeing is companies becoming even more frugal and more focused on understanding supply chain, its effect on people, whether just-in-time supply works anymore, understanding how very quickly some of the international rules and order have literally been disbanded as governments rush to protect their people, and understanding what is actually an essential item, because on face value, food might be an essential item, but actually there are underlying tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 suppliers which make that possible, and those suppliers have not been classified as essential, right? So I think the disruption is of such a magnitude that we will now be going through a transition of what is normal. And that transition basically means corporations like ourselves and some of them on the call beginning to understand whether the current structures work, understanding whether we do need to build some capacity development for smaller suppliers, more nimble suppliers who are supplying products through large companies. And I think one of the comments also which came up was companies now need to innovate with a purpose. We cannot just provide products anymore. And by that, I mean, there was some research which was done, which said that something like 60%, over 66% of consumers now want to buy from companies that make products that reflect them. And that metric still holds true for Generation X and Generation Y and Z, who really want to make sure that people are buying from companies that make products in an ethical way. What that means now is COVID has literally exposed the international rules, the trust that we have in the system. And so the future generation will be even more focused on this, right? Why I say that is because the enabler is going to be technology. So how we equip those young people of tomorrow to buy goods from us, that talk to them is going to be very important. because a lot of them are going to be scarred. We hear terrible statistics around, for every 1 week of a young person from a poor background is off school, it means significant loss of income in the future. Okay. So for me, when I look at the disruption, it's going to be, beyond just organizations, but in any case, organizations are made up of people. And these people of tomorrow are going to be even more inquisitive in how we deliver those products and services.
Well, thanks, Ben. Yeah, what a great a lot of insights there. I particularly think that one about trust, I think, is significant, and agility, and I mean, I'm a small business specialist, and so I hadn't really considered the fact that, of course, as corporates, everybody's under pressure. So this thing of frugality and being really cost effective and using just in time are, of course, very pertinent. And then, having said that, I realize I forgot to introduce myself. So let me do that quickly. So my name is Kathryn Weinberg. I'm CEO and founder of Fatola. And Fatola's job is to build businesses that last. So we're enterprise and supply development specialists. And I'm actually a founding partner of the Supply Development Awards, along with my partners, Arena, who's hosting this call today, and Cold Press Media. So yeah, so just to put a little bit of context on myself, I mean, I'm a long-term serial entrepreneur myself. I had over 30 years in starting and running a number of businesses. And so I really speak from the point of the small supplier. But yes, of course, I think cost effectiveness, efficiency is going to be something, there's going to be tremendous pressure. And that's definitely where digital is going to be able to help us. Thank you, Ben. Lovely insights there. So I think we're going to go now let's go to Lita. No, so apologies. Let's go to Johan Lowe. So Johan is founder of Uguru Business Solutions. He's the managing director there, and a specialist in industrial automation and digital transformation. And Johan offers unique insight into value chains required to deliver complex projects in the digital world. So over to you, Johan. What do you believe are the solutions that could be put to play in this new COVID world?
Good morning, Kathryn and panel and listeners. Thank you for this opportunity, and I think it's a very important topic for us, not just locally but globally, as we will see the impact of decision making at every business level just sort of transition around the world. I think what we must understand with digital is that it gives us this amazing opportunity of connecting value streams, and we can do that much more efficiently. So Ben talked about it, the impact of supply chains and supplier of the supplier. I think it's very necessary for corporates to sit down right now with their supply chain and look at where are the risks and think beyond the immediate supplier. Think about the supplier, and so forth. And by using digital solutions, we can generate data. And data is really, if we look at the oil price being practically zero, we can really put a lot of focus on the value of data in our business right now. We know that customers make decisions on information of our products. So that's an area where we really want to focus on what we put out to our customers, what information they have available, and what is the ease of doing business with the entrepreneur, with a specific supplier. So that would be the first area where we want to focus. The second area we want to focus is what is happening internally within our business. Again, we want information to be available. So what are we doing inside our business to make our workforce and our management team enabled, and giving them access to the information to execute on those orders. So when we have this combination of customer need, customer information flowing into order process and execution process, we can now build a whole value stream of data, and we can look very carefully at optimization. Of course, once we now start building good quality data over a period of time, we can start bringing in some further analytical aspects into how we conduct our business, how we engage with customers. And that, with some further, more advanced technologies, give us further analysis opportunities. So really, we need to look at this from a collective and holistic point of view, how information is flowing through our businesses to our customers.
Excellent. Thank you, Johan. As a small business specialist, I have to say that probably the biggest challenge in business today is integration of data. We have huge amounts of it. We have vast quantities of it, but unless it's integrated, it's pretty much useless. And so for me, that would be one of the big divides that we have to bridge going forward, is how do small businesses create integration? And then how do you integrate that information into the supply chain of the major corporate? So I think you've raised a couple of really good points. Let's move on now to Alison. Alison Jacobson, she's the director of the Field Institute and a strategist, digital transformation advisor, and executive coach. She leads international teams on strategy, disruption, and digital leadership, and previously was at Dimension Data, where she launched the group's digital advisory practice. Alison particularly enjoys working with senior leadership to navigate the future of work and strategic change, and is a thought leadership on disruption. Well, Alison, this is your time. So really from your side, what's happening, what's happening, and how have you seen supply chains disrupted, and where do you think that we're going to go with this?
Thanks, Kathryn. I think that never waste a good crisis would be the phrase that comes to my mind. And why do I say this? Because so much of what is going on prior to COVID-19 has been unsustainable, and I think has led to quite a lot of destructive behavior. And if I take this at a much more emotional and personal level, which I feel we should, even if we're talking about supply chains and digital transformation, I look around and I think that on some fronts, not a lot of us have been very happy with the status quo. And yet the way that we approach our businesses, the way that maybe we approach our lives, has been incrementalism, where we try and improve from the status quo, and we say things like, well, this is how things have always been done, and so this is how we have to do them. We're now at a seismic shift where no, nothing that's ever been done is how we're going to get to continue to do them, and we have an opportunity to sort of rethink. And I mean this most deeply and sincerely. I think that this is a very, very big juncture in the sort of history of humanity, and beyond humanity, life for other species on the planet, which is sometimes not something we talk that much about when we're talking about the impact of this on us, or the impact of anything on us. It's us and others. We're all in it together. And to talk about supply chains, which to my mind, one definition of a supply chain is an attempt to deliver an outcome through orchestrating chaos. And what more chaos than chaos upon chaos that we find ourselves in today? And one of the factors for me in terms of, sorry, there's a low-flying airplane, either that or I'm about to be bombed. It happens. What can you do? Nothing would surprise me at this point. The interesting sort of dynamic for me in terms of the concept of what needs to change, what needs to stay the same, what choices do we even have in that when the rug's been pulled out from underneath us, is that the principle of supply chain comes out of the history of lean manufacturing, which is basically you have a kind of a fairly fixed, static process which runs end to end. And what you're wanting to do is to remove waste and to remove or reduce variance and improve output, improve quality. This assumes that we know what's going on and that we've done it before, and that it's repetitive and rules-based, and now we're in an optimization and efficiency mode. What's happening in the moment in the world is the ratio has shifted from knowns to unknowns. And even in the supply chains that have been deemed to be necessary to run at this point, we were talking before the call started about how much, if you look through the whole system of the supply chain, how much was sort of unexpected, and what are the unintended consequences of shutting down other parts of businesses that fed into that supply chain. And so what I see here is a move from the traditional kind of lean thinking into something which requires much more agile thinking. And what agile talks to is basically what to do in times of unknown. And when we move into this, we have to understand that we have to deal at a level of experimentation with unknowns and sort of probe our way into the future. And that in order to do so, we have to do so together, because the supply chain, as I said, orchestrating chaos, we have to really look at the parts that make up the whole. And if you try and optimize any one of those parts, you always fail. what has to happen is that we need to be looking at the collective, we need to be looking at the ecosystem, we need to be looking at the totality end to end and optimizing for the whole at a systems level. What I'm seeing left, right, and center is a failure to actually enact systems thinking. And so we're having a breakdown where there are unintended consequences on top of unintended consequences. And the last thing I'll say is sort of to this point is before we can think about doing digital transformation or doing digital, we have to think digital. We have to think differently if we're going to act differently. And I think that that's maybe my one sort of caution is how has our thinking been disrupted, or how does it need to be disrupted in this time of sort of tremendous upheaval?
Great, lovely. Thanks very much. Thanks, Alison. I think the comment that's really stuck with me is the need to be innovative and agile, and those are exactly the capabilities and characteristics of small business. So the beautiful opportunity here for small businesses in the supply chain is because they do think quickly and they act quickly, and so that sort of agility and responsiveness is really important. I suppose the question then is, how do you integrate that into a corporate value chain? Because as we know, corporate value chains are not that great at taking risk, and they want a certain volume of supply. And so maybe one of the challenges going forward is applying your systems thinking is, how does one create collectives of small businesses so that they can provide those sort of agility that you're speaking about? Lovely. Thanks very much. Beautiful context. Thank you. So last of all, and I'm glad you didn't get bombed. Last of all, to Lita. So really delighted to welcome Lita Kuta. So Lita's Director of Enterprise and Supply Development at Tiger Brands. He is right at the forefront in an essential industry at the moment. And so very lucky to have him with us today, because I know he's under tremendous pressure. So Lita has held this position at Tiger Brands since April of last year, and has really extensive experience working in digital, working in a number of different supply chains, working as a small business developer, but also on the corporate side, looking at supply development and supply chain optimization. So his ESG experience includes bridging the divide between the supply chain and the digital domain. So Lita, I'm really delighted to have you on board. And please really tell me, what is your experience currently in the supply chain that you're busy managing? What are the kind of challenges that you're working with at the moment?
Thank you very much. Because our mandate is to work with small business and make sure that they carve a way of being part of the big value chain of Tiger Brands. I mean, key components to it talks to issues of supplier recruitment, right, which links to sourcing. And then it's about deployment and delivery that suppliers then are expected to be able to do that, and the oversight that one has to do to make sure that they deliver based on the mandate that they've actually been received. But what we're picking up is that because of lack of digitization, from if you look at the integration of the ERP systems that big firms have, and the lack of systems that small business have, is that some of the suppliers who were on the process of being onboarded, that has literally stopped, right? Because the lack of digitization to make sure that you manage onboarding process. Something as simple as that. People got in 10 of opportunities, but when it's time now to get them into the supply chain, you're able to do that because we are not designed to do these things digitally, right? And this is across board. When I also talk to my colleagues in other firms, is that there's kind of like this abrupt stop in terms of onboarding new suppliers. And this also is affected by the issue that now there's a refocus who is an important supplier, because normally companies will do their classification of suppliers and say this is a strategic supplier, this is a must-have, this is a decline supplier, this is an exit supplier. But currently now you've got issues around essential and non-essential. All of a sudden now that is what informs what is important, right? And you find that in small businesses that are in the value chain, I think Ben has mentioned it, that are ranked down second, third, and fourth tier, might be essential to a core product that one has to source, right? And unfortunately, that actually collapses the whole supply chain for a particular product. I'll do an example. Our CEO mentioned about 2 weeks ago that we were struggling we didn't have enough caps for Energade. So that small cap was holding everything in terms of getting the product out. And you might find when you go through the chain, that small cap was done by a very small, nimble supplier who is not a, in your primary, So corporates also deal with companies that they interface every day, not with companies that their suppliers are interfacing with. And now you're starting to find that focus also needs to go beyond just looking at the suppliers you're talking to and you're contracted to. You need to be able to do your value chain mapping to know that supplier X is providing me Y, but they are sourcing from A, B, C, D, E, and be able to map what is strategic and what is not. Because sometimes your strategic product doesn't lie with your primary supplier. It lies in their own supply chain, right? And then, unfortunately, because now there is this no mapping that you find in the market of mapping from primary to secondary to your third tier, is that everyone is scrambling to, to get products, right? But you are being holded by a supplier who's far down the line. So when it comes to supplier development, it raises the question that then, do you just push for suppliers who are directly linking with your supply chain? Or do you then start saying, do I go tier 1, 2, 3, or 4? Or do I look at the strategic importance of that supplier into my product development, right? And make sure that I'm able then to support the right suppliers, whether they are first tier, second tier, or third tier, right? And digitization then becomes a challenge for small businesses because of issues of, for example, data cost, right? We've got high cost of data. I mean, for an example, one colleague of mine, when we said we're going to be working at home, within a week, she says, but my dongle wasn't designed to work at home. I've run out of data. And we like, oops, sorry, we had to talk to IT, talk to our telecom partner to increase data. I'm just talking about something as simple as that, right? Imagine entrepreneurs were not geared to buy these big data, don't have access to fiber and so forth. It makes it difficult for them to be able, because over and above that, not just the cost of data, the cost of solutions of data. For example, in my field, I get a lot of guys who says, because we are a food manufacturer, they want to supply us agri-tech, right? Drones to look over a farm, only to find out these things are expensive if you look at the yields that the farmer is actually going to be getting. So all of a sudden, it becomes a cost and the farmer struggles because no one has actually said, if you include this cost, your yields will increase by X, right? So your cost of solutions is also pretty much very, so for me, it's really looking at how do we make sure that we rationalize our own supply chain ERPs to be linked to the digital platforms that entrepreneurs have. Because by then, your swift ordering will happen, your swift onboarding, making sure that they get the right spec to deliver, unlike these emails that get flogged in between the supplier and the primary buyer, to make sure that integration of systems is also pretty much very, looked at. But unfortunately, that raises issues again of security, right? Which also are costly when you look at solutions that are there in the market.
Wow, thanks, Lita. Gosh, you've really painted a picture of the reality in the coal on the coal face at the moment. Thank you so much for that. I think one of the things that comes to mind as you're speaking is the importance of caring for one's supply chain into the future. So I think what you're speaking about is this real disruption. So moving away from the linear concept of a linear supply chain into an actual network. So how do you access the network? Because you just need to do business. Right now, the important thing is you need to get the products, you need to get them on time and preferably at the right price. And you just need to get out there and find them. And so really complete disruption in the supply chain from linear to networks. I think also particularly in your environment, because you're working in primary production, so you're a food processing, the digital divide between your small suppliers that might be on the agriculture field and for you is really huge. And yes, I can see a huge amount of transformation needed in order to build these supply chains into the future. So yeah, thank you for really painting a very vivid picture of the kind of real challenges that are happening at the bottom end. Before we go to, before I go back to my guests, we've had a number of really nice questions coming in. And I'd like to maybe direct one of them to you, Ben. It's from a caller, Guy Harris, who's asking how can medium enterprises, so medium enterprises that are trying to scale, how can they be integrated into globally competitive supply chains? Do you think, Ben, do you think this is a possibility at this time, particularly speaking about a South African medium-sized businesses wanting to get into the global supply chain? Do you have a comment on that?
Yes, actually, I was just reflecting on my closing points, and actually, this is one of them. I think that I think Alison actually talked about it. You know, there is something to get out of this crisis, and I think that it will make it possible to level the competition as everything shifts towards digital, right? You know, a physical shop finds it difficult to compete with a digital shop, and I think in some respects it will be a great leveler. And as we transfer our small suppliers into a digital space, I think then the next step will be around collaboration. So I would think that there are a number of large kind of what is it called, ecosystem partners, as we call them, where, for example, our company will have partners in China, India, South Africa, Canada, and so forth, where we engage our small suppliers, medium suppliers. And I would think that a move towards digital means that it's easy to connect into those different groups where they are around the world. And so what that does is then it allows them to collaborate more. And what it would do also is we now have to recognize that the supply chain, as I said at the beginning, is quite interconnected. So trying to find those partners who can complement your product, right? Because if we, let's try and remain niche in what we do, and you then know that there is actually a gap in your own value chain, and then partnering with those other SMEs which you might find in the different groups around the world to help you compete globally. So I think that's one way we can utilize a crisis to kind of showcase our small medium enterprises.
Yeah, nice. Thanks, Ben. So take the 3 C's out of what you're saying. That to look to collaborate with other small suppliers, look to connect with them and with the clients that you're looking to work with, and find ways to complement your resources. And it kind of links to my conversation earlier that one of the things with small businesses, small and medium businesses, is to reach the size to be able to deal effectively with big global organizations such as yourself. Lovely, thank you so much. Alison, there's a question here that I'd like you to deal with. It comes in from a caller, Ian, and it says digital is crucial going forward in the supply chain. But how is this possible in Africa with low access to digital platforms, and expensive or cheap and reliable data is difficult, and a huge gap in the education system that largely ignores digital education? So Alison, maybe you'd just like to have a thought about that, because I know digital education is very much a part of your skill set.
Well, firstly, thanks, Ian. Throw me an easy one. But it really does, it is the fundamental question, because if we're really going to talk about systems thinking, then the system is not merely the end point, which is a supply chain which is up and running. It's how did we get to that point in the first place? What is the economic condition? What's the educational context? And can we run all of these kinds of digital platforms and partnerships and so on in a landscape which may not be even electrified? So these are very, very real challenges. I wouldn't presume to have any kind of global easy answer, but let me try and tackle sort of some of the points. You said something earlier, Kathryn, which I thought was really important, which is one of the sort of advantages of being a small business, and it talks also to the earlier question about how can medium-sized businesses start getting involved in these sort of bigger supply chains. Now's the time for agility. Now's the time to pivot. Now's the time to put aside what was and think about what needs to be. And quite frankly, small businesses have a much greater propensity to do that than large businesses. Large businesses, and particularly when it comes to core functions and supply chains, have a tremendous focus on governance, risk, and compliance. Small businesses have a much greater focus on survival and getting things done, and potentially breaking rules in order to do that within reason, obviously, and to good effect. And I think that this talks to something about my observations working in Africa and working in South Africa, which is the principle of frugal innovation, getting things done in the most cost-effective possible way and not relying on how we've always done it, because the truth is we may not have done it before. So there's a tremendous amount of creative energy and possibility that comes from, I believe, people in Africa, certainly what I'm observing in South Africa, to bring a certain kind of personal and professional resilience to some of these new problems. To say that, of course, we have many, many challenges, I can't deny those, challenges on top of challenges. But at the same time, we have an opportunity to emerge into a future of sort of our creation, because we just simply don't have the kind of the history and the precedent of a kind of enormous governance, risk and compliance that we might have found elsewhere. So I'm seeing a tremendous amount of innovation. And one of the examples of this is also in the kind of commerce and payment space, which is of course a huge aspect of supply chain, is how are you going to pay people, and how are you going to pay people when they can't physically get to banks and ATMs. And an example of this, in the face of our education crisis, and we do have a crisis, and in the face of our industrialization crisis and data and digital and all kinds of things. I saw an example last night of a project that was posted on LinkedIn by actually a colleague of mine in the Caribbean, who pointed out a project that's happening in the inner city of Johannesburg. And I think that the project's name, but I'll certainly provide details after this, I think it was Back a Buddy. And what they're doing is looking at sort of food production and food distribution in the inner city of Johannesburg, using local spaza shops as distribution points and collection points for food parcels that are being paid for using e-wallet systems and vouchers. So basically completely circumventing any kind of existing structure around not traditional kind of banking, and also circumventing, from what I can see, governmental structures, which, as we know, are in part failing us in South Africa at this point in time. Not in full, but certainly we have many concerns and stories about sort of problems in the system. So what I've seen in this Back a Buddy program is an example of sort of digital ingenuity and frugal innovation that basically goes right to the point of what is the outcome we're trying to achieve and what's the best way to achieve it, not relying in any way whatsoever on how have we always done it and what systems existed historically in order for us to do this. So they're relying on an informal economy of spaza shops, e-wallets, and local collection points to do food distribution. And the vouchers are being purchased by sponsors who may be individuals or companies who are wanting to make sure that they get to the last mile. In other words, rather than sponsoring into a vacuum, they're sponsoring vouchers that end up in people's hands, sort of average, ordinary South African citizens who are in need, who are going into an informal, hastily assembled, very, very interesting supply chain environment, which certainly is born of our challenges rather than any of our luxuries. I thought it was a very interesting project.
Yeah, thanks, Alison. I think you've touched on a couple of really nice innovations that are coming through. And what is exciting is the willingness in Africa to go with these new solutions, these new payment solutions. We seem to be leaders in that compared to some other parts of the world. So lovely. Thank you for that. We've also had another question in that I'm going to direct to you, Johan. A caller, Ross, has asked us to comment on the distribution gap in solutions that exist for small businesses in South Africa. So he's particularly talking about digital solutions and saying the know-how and training is there, often free online, and the need for the information is clearly there for suppliers. But why is there such a gap between the digital solutions that are available for big businesses and small businesses? I don't know if you want to just comment on that, Johan.
Yeah, I guess it's a subject that is relevant to how any technology develops and flows. You need an early adopter, and then you need a commercialization of that technology to continue to make it viable for the developer. And therefore, it's no surprise that the developing nation, if you can put it that way, have focused on big corporates to bring solutions to be able to scale and to generate the profits that they want for their businesses. I think what we've seen over the last decade is that, particularly in the industrial automation type world where I came from, is that we had a number of very large players and not such a big number of smaller players that was really commanding the market. And what we see today now, a decade and a half later, is that in the digital space, we have literally tens, if not hundreds of thousands of players around the world. And what we have observed through that is that digital solutions come with a very bespoke, very focused attention to solving the problem that you have defined. So for a small business, they need to take the care to understand what is the problem that they have defined, and then do the effort, do the research to be able to find those solutions out there. For corporates, they might, they stand on the hill and everybody comes to them to say, look at my solution. This is what it can do for you. Maybe the smaller SMME is not going to get that level of attention. And therefore, there has to be a very strong focus for smaller outfits to work in an ecosystem, engage with parties that have perhaps walked a path or have found solutions, and certainly do their homework. But it brings out some of the concerns, like what Alison was saying, is access to data. And I think it's important here for customers and, or not customers, but corporates and companies selling. If you want to enable your market, you need to be sure that your market can get to you. Now, in the past, your getting to you meant driving down the main road, seeing your advert, coming into the shop. While today, they need to be able to get online. So you need to start thinking about models, about how you can give your customer access to data at your cost, but bringing virtually feet through the door. And we've got a very nice solution here, developed by a local team here in Cape Town, that has looked at the SMS market as an approach for customer engagement. Everybody's got access to SMS. But from there, they found that 91% of SMSs are opened versus things like Facebook, 12%, emails, 22%, social media, 29%. So SMS has got a much higher hit rate for getting the customer's attention. From there, it goes to a mini site that the seller is funding. There's no cost to the potential customer. They go, they get the information, they can even place the order. So these are some of the practical solutions how a small business can ensure that they get their virtual feet through the door, getting exposure to their product or their service, and being able to do business from there.
Sure, that's really exciting, Johan. The only thing is, I'm not sure that I want to now be bombarded by SMSs as well. But what a lovely, lovely thought. And what really comes to mind is that what's going to change now is things that were normal in the past. Well, nothing. What was a month ago no longer will exist or will be changed. And for me, it's about where does the boundary sit. So it's, as you're saying, at the moment, there's an expectation, and Lita is also speaking to it. At the moment, the expectation is the supplier is going to purchase the data in order to communicate with the corporate. But it may be that in future, speaking to the kind of solutions you just shared there, Johan, it may be that it actually moves the other way, and that the corporate actually supplies the data in order to keep their suppliers close to hand. Really lovely. So many changes. Wow, it's a new world out there. It's going to be very, very exciting, kind of scary at the same time. But yeah, lots of amazing things coming forward. Thanks so much for that, Johan. I think let's actually just do then around. I think what's really important in this conversation is what we've spoken about is huge disruption, massive change, a real big need for rethinking, rescoping everything. And lots of exciting stuff coming through at the same time as it being really quite alarming for so many small suppliers, and I think actually for a lot of large corporates as well. So what I'd like to do is maybe a last round of input from my guests with your thoughts about what do you believe are the most critical things that we should be doing going forward. So maybe you as your organization, either as a corporate or as a small suppliers, what do you believe is the kind of one point that people should take forward with hope for changing, for making things better in the post-COVID world? And I think, let me start off with you, Ben.
Excellent. No, that's been quite insightful. And I think just to just add one little point to that, previous Johan's previous speaking notes, and I think that collaboration or collaborative platforms are going to be very, very important going forwards.
Yep.
I say that because I'm actually working on something really cool around how do we now bring our suppliers much closer together? How do we make sure that the demand we have on our suppliers is actually relevant for them, right? And in doing that, how do we now co-collaborate together, knowing that our supply chains are distributed, I think, to Lytha's point as well earlier. So this is going to be quite important, especially from larger corporations in how they make themselves, even better corporate citizens. But to conclude, really, my one takeaway point here is that we have to make sure that suppliers are relevant. I mean, suppliers as everybody on the call, as in your digital footprint now will have to be a lot more precise, a lot more targeted about what you're trying to deliver and what is actually your role in building a responsible business environment, right? Which goes to my point around trust earlier. Why do I say that? For example, in our team, right now, I'm able to track a number of our suppliers real time for what they're doing in the areas of, say, human rights, environment, and governance, how you're managing your business. So the commercial aspect is one great thing because we do need that product delivered in an efficient, commercially effective way. But at the same time, we are now also wanting to understand the actual social impact of the suppliers. So how we do that is actually scouring. We have a third party that does that for us to scour all our suppliers, big and small, to understand what are they actually doing in the world. So I would say that going forwards, I think we all have to be relevant, and in being relevant, we need to think the 360 approach. Making sure our websites are in tip-top conditions, and also those websites telling us what we do, because people like myself are checking using robots to see what what our suppliers are doing.
Yeah, lovely. Thanks, thanks, Ben. I think that point of trust is such an important one, and that this sense that one thing that is going to change as a result of this is actually maybe we're going to be in a kind of world. And so really understanding who you are as a supplier, are you ethical, and having much more open channels to that kind of information, two-way information, and collaborative networks. I love it. Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks, Ben. Alison, what are your thoughts, maybe just as a wrap up? What do you think are the most important things that we can take forward from this to change the world for a better going forward?
So a lot of the language that we are all using, which I support strongly, we're saying things like collaboration and partnerships and ecosystems and trust and visibility and sustainability, and a lot of this language that I think we all know to be important and will become increasingly important. So I want to say there are many, many dimensions to how we establish that in terms of the way we work with one another and our ways of working, the way we increase the porosity of our businesses so that we become more boundaryless and we can work together more collaboratively. Some of what you were saying, Kathryn, around groups of small businesses coming together to see if they can sort of support new supply chains and new business models and new business opportunities. I think all of that is important. It's all up for grabs. There's no question going forward that if you as a business owner or a business person feel that you are on the outside of digital, you need to change that. It's not a spectator sport. Everybody needs to get in the game, whether you run a physical supply chain with physical products or you run a digital supply chain with digital products. You need to use whatever tools and technologies and thinking available to all of us so that you can actually advance your business efficiently, effectively, etc. And there are so many resources available for learning about these things online, so many freely available. Obviously, you do need to be able to get online, and I do recognize that that is not evenly distributed, unfortunately. But there are so many places that one can sort of take on these new ways of thinking and new sort of tool sets and techniques, and so many free technologies. Free systems that could be used by small businesses. And I think that Johan was talking to this sort of technology diffusion. What used to be the sort of domain of only large business, we can now, as small business owners, set up SMS and email campaigns and CRM systems and and so on. I'm not saying that there's no barrier to entry, but the barrier to entry is certainly lowered. But there is one thing that I want to sort of point out, and I think I would be remiss in a conversation like this not to use the word blockchain, so I'm going to use it. We are talking about sort of new technological architectures, which also include ways of thinking and governing. And what I expect to see as a result of a lot of this disruption globally in supply chain and more is increased interest from large organizations around blockchain technology, because what it will bring is the traceability, the visibility, the sort of what you spoke to earlier, data interoperability. We want to be able to see who makes up our supply chain, and we should be able to have a much greater systems thinking view. And at the moment, what we see are silos and pockets of data, which are impossible, if not to integrate. And the data ownership and the sort of the lack of sort of self-sovereignty in terms of that data. Whose data is it across the supply chain? If Tiger Brands has a small supplier, as one of 100 making Energade or whatever the case is, what sort of data visibility is available to all of the different participating suppliers in that supply chain, given that it's all of our livelihoods, or all of their livelihoods rather, I should say. So I think that there are new conversations that we're going to be having about a lot of these things forced through this crisis. For me personally, it is frightening, but it's also very exciting. And I think that the last thing I'd like to say to people is get in the game.
Thanks, Alison. I think my takeaway from that is digital is not a spectator sport. I think we'll put that as a banner underneath this conversation generally. Lovely, fantastic input. Thank you. Johan, do you have some last, kind of a last pointer as to what you believe that people should be doing in the supply chain to move things forward in the future?
Yes, Kathryn, I think first thing we must remember is that money follows risk. And right now, our customers have more risks than they had 3 months ago. I was working with an organization where they have looked at their past capabilities that they were offering clients, and they could very quickly repurpose that to support COVID-19, bringing people together, are they touching, contact tracing, that type of situation. The point with that is that customers have got new problems, so we need to rethink about how we can position solutions to them. We might create new business opportunities. We have to go forward now to understand that there are a very important obligation that we are all owning. And that is that the people still coming to our businesses are at risk of infection. So we've got to think about digital solutions that can help with screening, perhaps access control, and doing contact tracing. We have to manage that responsibility for everybody on site, our staff and our customers. So we certainly have to pay attention to that aspect. Secondly, we have to focus on customer engagement. I think we have all spoken about that. But the essence is here is get the right message delivered in the right way that works for the customer. So we need to look at platforms where we can get that information, ease of doing business, ease of doing payments, all of those things that are helping us. And then lastly, when we look at our own organization internally, we should be doing things that is creating business, that is generating profit, that is giving us sustainability. Anything else is waste. So we've got to look at processes within our business. How can we optimize? How can we remove? How can we digitize so that we can work as effectively as possible? The aspect of that is how can my workforce and management teams operate remotely and still being efficient? And I think as a last point, we have an obligation to look at digital as a solution, but we also need to make sure that we bring everybody along. How can we educate our staff, our suppliers, our communities, and giving them access to data? I think these are very important questions for corporates, for communities to discuss, so that we can unlock the value from the digital future that we are likely to see dominating business going forward.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you for that. And thank you also just for reminding us that there's a virus in this. We tend to think we're all business people, so we tend to think just about the economic impact and kind of forget that there's also a virus. So yeah, thank you for that pointer. Thanks, Jan. So yeah, so Lita, coming to you then for your last input, what do you believe is the one thing that we should be doing going forward into the post-COVID environment?
Thank you very much, Kathryn. There's about 4 things really I want to focus, but I'll really quickly just run through them. Firstly is issues of access. Access is very critical because there are marginalized suppliers and there are those that are advantaged because they are integrated into the supply chain and in the forefront. So when you talk access then and you talk digital, issues of data becomes critical. I think Johannes said it and Ben and Alison have said it, that your cost, so that links to that. As an enabler, government has to deal with the issue of spectrum. We've seen now that there is a COVID spectrum that has been issued because that talks to speed, right? How quick can I download product? How quick can I use my solutions that will enable my business to operate? And also moving from analog to digital, because those are the 2 enablers that from the government that they could do to make sure that digitization is able to be entrenched in society. And then once those things happen, then business has to start to digitize their market access. Entrepreneurs must be able to compete for opportunities, know about opportunities, bid for opportunities in a digital manner. You know, a supplier that is in Cape Town should be able to bid for an opportunity that is in Gauteng. All right, not necessarily having to fill all these big forms, because that's what slows down the process. All right, we need ESD programs that are digitized. We need to make sure that we get to as many people as possible. Unfortunately, your classroom-based ESD is not going to work. It's not doing enough. It's not reaching enough. And our solution access, our entrepreneurs need to access them. So issues of cost, issues of when we run these when we run all these small enterprises programs that are developing digital, right? We need to make sure that they are able to develop low tech, but high impact tech, so that we are able to get entrepreneurs to access solutions because the cost of solutions are very high. Then performance, in terms of performance management, one of the big challenges now with COVID is how do companies manage performance? How does Tiger Brand manage my performance at home? Right? Because not wired, we're wired to go into offices and operating there. It becomes a huge challenge. That performance management, I think Johannes said it with solutions. We need tools, project management tools, compliance. I mean, all these relief programs, one of the big major challenges of SMEs not accessing it is compliance. Most of them said we cannot access because compliance management is not there. That can be digitized to make sure that SMEs are able to access programs that they should be benefiting of. Then in terms of ESD support, we need to make sure that it's digitized, as I said, but also it needs to talk to risk management orientated ESD. What could go wrong? What are the mitigation? And we invest in mitigation, not the training that we do, the old stuff that we do every time when we develop small enterprises. And the last one, I think the colleagues have mentioned it, Ben said it, it's really collaboration, right? The collaboration of the digital means the ICT industry is an enabler of all industries. So they shouldn't be running ESD programs isolatedly from integrating from other industries. For an example, I support farmers and they need solutions, farm management solution, inventory management, you know, how to manage yield and all of that. That could be enabled by another industry, right, which is the ICT, so that I can be able to draw those solutions. The farmers are able to use it and we are able to better manage the farmers. So integration between sectors becomes pretty much very important. And the last point is we share suppliers. A small supplier to me could be bigger to someone else. So how to incorporate, not brag who's doing better at ESD, but rather how do we enhance and build the network? Because the stronger network we are, the lesser they are exposed to risks. Unfortunately, some of the small suppliers are going to be closed because they are less supported in one industry, whereas they could be more supported in another industry. How about the two industries coming together to put programs to make sure that SMEs are supported in a dual manner? My last point is, I'm in agriculture, I'm in food manufacturing. I'm not good at developing tech because we're not wired to do that. But if you go to your ICT industry, telecoms, there are better positions to do that. How do I make sure that they can support my entrepreneurs in areas where I can't? Other than support them in areas I can and leave anything that I can't, only to find out that poses a risk. So from a small business development, we need to collaborate as an industry.
So lovely, passionate closing words from, whoops, something's gone wrong. There we go. Lovely, passionate words from you, Lita, for closing. Thank you so much. So I just want to pick up then 5 themes and really close with those. I think the first thing, Lita, thank you so much for reminding government that they have a huge role to play in this. The future is all about digital. The small businesses can only compete if they have access to digital. South African businesses can only compete globally if they use digital in order to improve efficiency. So yes, government has to get up there and start solving the data problem. I think that I wanted to say 5 things. I think blockchain, yes, absolutely, Alison. Blockchain is a way to integrate, increase efficiency, and make sure that that trust component is there. I think that's absolutely essential. We've all agreed that collaboration is key. Bringing businesses into platforms. I think from a small business perspective, I'm very excited about that. That's the work that we're busy on, but really creating collaborative platforms so that each individual business isn't trying to solve their own tech problem alone or not trying to solve their supply chain problems alone. So definitely opening up information, making access to information more free. So for corporates, being less, it's my territory, and more about actually we're all in this together. And if we open things up and that we can all advance and succeed. And then maybe 2 last things I want to say. The first is to everybody who's leading a business, maybe everybody as an individual, but everybody that's leading a business, is stay your course. It's very easy for coronavirus and this COVID thing to completely take us off our focus, and for us to lose our purpose and to lose our personal or our business vision, and to kind of become completely blown off our track. It's really important at this time to go back and look at one's vision and purpose and absolutely stay true to that, both as individuals and as businesses. And then the last thing I'd like to say to corporates is, look after your suppliers. This is the time. This is not the time to throw the small guys under the bus just because it's a bit tricky. Because at the end of this, the people that you are going to be with you are those people that you've cared for along the way. And just casting off a supplier because it doesn't suit you at the moment, in your long-term vision, if you're going to need them, you're going to need to be looking after them today. And so that would be one of the things that I really would make an appeal to everybody, small, medium, and large businesses. Look at the long view, and look after both your staff, your consultants, and your suppliers with that long game in mind. So I'd like to say thanks. I've been fantastic. I mean, so honored to have all of you with me today. I've learned a lot. It's been interesting. I'm sure we're going to continue this conversation afterwards. And I know that there are some questions that came through that we didn't have an opportunity to answer. And we will be sharing them among the panelists and making sure that we answer everybody that raised a question. So I'd like to just say thank you again and encourage everybody in the supply development, from small businesses to corporates to CEOs, to stay involved, and because it's together that we're going to solve this, and it's together that we're going to come out stronger at the end. And I'd like to invite you to stay in touch with these digital conversations. They will be hosted on the website, the sdawards.coza. And a reminder that the Supply Development Awards will be happening on the 9th of September. And I really encourage everybody to play that game. Not only those people that believe that they have a good spot to win, because this, sure enough, is going to be the most difficult supply development year that anybody's ever had. But please to play the game, because it's not just about the winning, it's about sharing the lessons and everybody gaining skills so that we can benefit as a country, as an economy, and into the rest of the world. So thanks very much. Thanks everybody. Thanks my speakers, and thanks for everybody for joining me. Have a great day. Cheers.